Marhaban, hello. My name is Ian Campbell, and this is the fourth in a series of videos intended to teach you the Arabic alphabet and sound system and to prepare you to understand how to learn vocabulary words. In this lesson, we're going to learn 3 more letters of the alphabet, jim, ha, and kha. And they're easy because they're all formed in exactly the same way, but 2 of them are kind of a challenge to pronounce. So I'm just going to start right up with the letter jim, which is the 5th letter in the alphabet. And it is a connecting letter that makes the zh sound, like pleasure or measure. Not usually a sound we begin words with in English, but this is very common in Arabic. And I'll talk about a little pronunciation variant as we go. Here's how we make it. We make a little hook like this, and then we make a nice round tail that goes way below the line, and then jim has a dot below it. So this is the letter jim. In Egypt, this will be pronounced g instead of zh, and this takes a little bit of getting used to, especially if you learn standard Arabic and then go to Egypt and you have to kind of re-pronounce all the words in your head for the first couple of weeks before you internalize it. So it's kind of a fancy looking letter, and it really differs in form from one place in a word to the other. So if it's in the first position of the word, we're going to make the hook, and we're going to move on to the next letter, and then we're going to come back and make our dot below after we're done making the rest of the haikal, or skeleton, of the word. In the middle, it's got 2 forms. One of them is usually used in print, and we come from the previous letter, and we make the hook shape, and then we take the pen off the paper, and then we continue on to the next letter and put our dot beneath. However, in handwriting, most people do this rather differently, but it's a little bit tricky. What they do is they think, oh, there's going to be a jim or a ha or a kha coming up in this word, so I'm going to make my other letters higher up on the page, and then I'm going to make jim or ha or kha this way by making a zigzag back and forth. And this takes getting used to because you have to remember, oh, hey, there's a jim, ha, or kha coming up here, so I've got to bump my previous letters up a little bit. Once you get used to it, it's not that big of a deal, but it's very common for students at your level to be like, oh, here's ba, here's ta, oh crud, here's jim, so I'm going to make it like this and go on. Which, okay, people will be able to read it. It's no big deal. It looks a little awkward, and after a while you'll get used to putting the other letters up above. There's nothing wrong with doing it this way here. If that's the way you want to make your jims in the middle of a word, that's just fine. Everyone will be able to read it. It's just that this is more proper handwriting style. And as I've mentioned before, in Arabic cultures, good handwriting is a sign of good character and respect for the people that you're writing to, so it matters a little bit more in English. So I would say while you're still learning the alphabet, it's okay to make it this way, but what you want to do is integrate this zigzag into your writing as soon as you can. If it's in the final position in a word, it's going to look a little bit like a backwards number 3. You're going to go up to make your hook, down, and then you're going to give it its long tail. Remember, words and letters in final position are often very similar to the solo position, which is going to, again, I've already drawn it, but it's going to look like this, and then our dot below. So really take up some vertical space with your last and solo jims, has, and khas. That's just fine. It's very nice to do, and again, Arabic is much more vertical than English is, and that's why I've got this kind of 2nd grade paper here with gaps between the lines, so you have the opportunity to make your letters as vertical as possible. If you are using regular college-ruled lined paper to practice your Arabic writing, like a lot of students do, I would highly, highly advise that you skip lines when you do it. It's going to be much, much easier to write and tremendously easier to read once you've done it. So do your professor a favor and skip lines when you write. Okay, so that's the letter jim. Usually it's the zh sound. If you live in the Gulf states, it's often pronounced j, like the English J. And if you live in Egypt, it's pronounced g, for reasons I've never actually had explained to me, despite having done this for 31 years. You just kind of roll with it. That's how they speak in Egypt. So now we're going to move to the next letter, whose name is ha. And you're like, but Professor Ian, you made it 7AA. What the heck is that? And the reason I've done this is because ha is a sound that just simply isn't made in English. It's the second most difficult of all the sounds to learn. And if I make it an H, sometimes you'll see capital H or an H with a dot underneath it because there is a regular H. It comes way at the end of the alphabet. It will really confuse people because they'll want to make it like an English H. Ha, 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 like that. But this is a very different sound. What I want you to do to learn to make it, because it's very foreign to English, is to pretend that it's a very hot day and you are a dog. And you're going to pant because you need to get your body cooler. So you're going to go ha, 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 like that. Try making that sound. Try panting like a dog. Don't do it on the bus, maybe. But ha, 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 like that. And this is the sound of the letter ha. And you have to learn to make it at the beginning of words, ha. And you have to learn to make it in the middle of words, ha. And you have to learn to make it at the ends of words as well. In English, when we have an H at the end of a word, we usually don't pronounce it. But in Arabic, we very much do, whether it's the regular H or this version of H, the letter ha. So you'll get a lot of words that will end with the ha sound. For example, it is 9:37 in the morning here in Atlanta. So if I were to greet you, I would say Sabahul Khair, morning of happiness, and you would say back to me Sabah an-Nur, morning of light, which is how we greet each other in the morning. The word for morning is sabah, and it ends with the letter ha. It also uses a letter we haven't learned yet, so here's how you draw it. Excuse me, I did that wrong. We make a loop and a little tooth and then another tooth for ba and then a big old alif and then a ha at the end of the word, and it looks like this. Sabah. You have to learn to end a word with that breathy H sound that is simply something we would never do in English. You'll have lots of time to practice this, but it's definitely not a sound made in English, so you have to take special care of it when you learn to do it. So as I drew it over there, ha looks just like jim, but does not have a dot at all. So it's just going to be the same set of shapes as you have for jim here, including the zigzag back and forth in the middle in handwriting as you learn to do it, but it doesn't have any dots at all. So pant like a dog. That is the sound you're making. Learn to make it at the beginning of a word, like hijab, the headscarf Muslim women often wear. Learn to make it in the middle of a word, like bath, which is research. Learn to make it at the end of a word, like sabah. It's a little tricky for an English speaker because it's a sound we don't make in English unless we're imitating a dog, and it's also a sound we would never put at the end of a word, and this is where students often mess up with it. So that's the letter ha, represented by the number 7, because back in the early days of text messaging, Arabs had only phones that would work with our alphabet and not theirs. This is in the late 1990s. And so they used numbers to represent some of the letters. And 7 is the number that I guess looks closest to this letter. So you'll often see it as the number 7. Now we're going to look at the final letter we learned today, which is the letter kha. Which all 3 of these letters are connecting letters, by the way. And it makes the raspy kh sound, which isn't really used in standard English, but we have it in a lot of loan words, like Otto from The Simpsons talking about the loch, or we could have the composer Bach, or we could celebrate Hanukkah at the end of the year. So kh is a sound that isn't really native to English, but is familiar enough to most English speakers that it's pretty easy to learn to make. And it is going to look just like jim or ha. That was a terrible one. Let's make that more elegant, shall we? And it is going to look just like jim, ha, or kha, or jim or ha, rather, only it's going to have the dot above this time. So kha has the dot above, ha has no dot at all, and jim has the dot below. Originally, through most of the 700s in our calendar, all 3 letters looked exactly the same, so you could see the potential for confusion there. So this is the ch sound. Not a difficult one to make because you've probably said loch or bach or Hanukkah at some point during your life. What I want to make clear to you, however, is that the h sound for the letter ha is not at all like the ch sound. Both of them are foreign to English, but they're made in very different parts of your mouth. So ha, ha, ha comes from way down in the bottom of your throat, and ch comes from the very back of your mouth. So don't mix them up. Don't pronounce a ha like a ch. This is a common mistake first-year students who are native speakers of English will make. So I'm going to head you off at the past here and make sure that you know not to mix up the two sounds because they are, in fact, quite different sounds, even though they're both foreign to an English speaker. So these are your three letters, jim, ha, and cha. And now I will talk about some examples of how to put them into words. So we're going to talk about cadence here and how to use syllables. And I'm going to use mostly nonsense words, but the first three are regular words. So let's look at this one here. Hajib. Hajib. So again, accent on the first syllable because it has a long vowel. And this is a very common word pattern. Letter number 1, alif, letter number 2, kasra, letter number 3. And this is what we call the ism fa'il in Arabic. It's the doer of an action, where the action is the three root letters. So the verb hajaba means to block something, and so a hajib is a blocker, an obstacle. And then we have hijab over here. So here we've reversed the stress on the syllables. First syllable doesn't get stress, second one does. Hijab, hijab. And notice how I've moved my ha up here so I can make my zigzag jim. And this is how you learn to make them. This is actually correct handwriting here, moving the letter up like this. You'll learn to do this as you go along. So the hijab is the headscarf, and you could see it has the same three letters, ha, and then jim, and then ba. And so anything with ha, jim, ba in it means something to do with blocking something. So you could see where hijab gets its name. It blocks off the hair from someone else's view. Originally, hijab means a screen. Like imagine an old black and white movie where someone is getting dressed behind a folding screen that's about head high. That's its original intention, but you can understand how it got the meaning of headscarf from there as well. And the headscarf was worn by a lot of Middle Eastern women long before Islam showed up. So now we have hawajib. I should put my kasra here to make it really clear. So when we have a waw before an alif, that means the waw is not going to be ooh, it's going to be wa instead. Like I said when I was talking about waw originally, it's quite easy to learn when to pronounce it like wa and when to pronounce it like ooh. And it's pretty hard to make a mistake once you get going with it. So hawajib. So short, long, short. Hawajib. And now I'm going to get into nonsense words because I don't have enough letters of the alphabet to make what I really want to make. So here we have thabah. Thabah. Hear that ha at the end of the word? You have to learn to do that. If you just say thabah, then no one is really going to understand what you mean. You need to be able to make this sound at the end of a word, especially after an alif. This is very common. So thabah. Thabah is how we say this word. And this is thabih. Thabih. So here h at the end, here ch at the end. This sound can go at any place in a word. So can this one. So can jim, for that matter. So thabih. Thabih. And here's khabith. Khabith. And here's khubuth. Khubuth. And we've seen this pattern before. Letter number 1, dhamma. Letter number 2, long vowel wow. Letter number 3. And this is usually a plural noun, sometimes the act of doing something. So this is a common pattern, you'll see. This is a really common pattern, the fa'il pattern, the hajib pattern, the doer. You'll see this over and over again. Now here I'm going to make a kha in the middle of a word. So look, I'm going to make my tooth for my ba up a little, and I'm going to move the dot up too. That's not a period, that's the dot for the ba. So this is bachit, bachit. like that. So that's how you make the zigzag in the middle of the word. Sometimes you get to have two zigzags. So here we have hajaba, hajaba. And this is the root verb for to block or impede something. Is hajaba. It would mean something like it blocked or he blocked. So these are jim, ha, and kha. They all look the same, but for the dots, and ha is a really difficult sound to learn to make, so learn to make it now and learn to make it at the end of the word. Thanks, everyone, and I will say ma salama. Goodbye.